So here was an opportunity to actually spend, I think it was nearly 4 days, out in the field with a pair of oxen. Just an absolute wonderful experience, really, in the trials and tribulations of doing this. You know, I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think ultimately the viewers enjoyed it as well. It was a series that started with, I think, 1.2 million viewers. It was expected, or anticipated, to get around about 1 million. You know, that was good for the slot in which it went out on. So when you start at 1.2, you think, oh, this is going to be a nail-biter. Because usually the viewing figures, they tend to sort of peter out. But here, in fact, we tended to go up in interest. And I think this peaked at something like 2.7 million viewers in the end. So it was a hugely successful series. And it really, in retrospect, and the reason I've started with this today is because I think the success of Victorian and Edwardian farming, which I'll obviously go on to talk about, I think it is born out of some of the elements that we introduced here in this series. You know, this sort of mini mutiny that we had, we said we don't want to make a traditional reality TV programme. I think that worked. I think ultimately people were interested enough in the period to tune in and watch week on week. But I think the other element that we introduced, and I think it's part of that is derived from Peter and my experience in archaeology and in experimental archaeology, is that we introduced, I think, the concept of the material past, okay, an artefactual past, and a skills-based, a very human-orientated past as well. And I think that was an important element. History on television is often dangerously narrative. It's very much a lecture that is presented. It's a one-way communication. It's a story that is often set in stone. And I think the important thing to have done with these programmes, and it's something that we're seeing in museums, is to present some of the issues people were faced with, present the materials, present some documentary sources. And I think the important thing is to have a go. And I think people learn, through us learning and making mistakes and bungling around on the farm, I think people learned more about those skills and became more interested. So I think that was the success. Well, I can move my book now, I think. To bring it back towards the end. Let's just go back a few here. So, yeah, with the success of Testing the Green Valley, eventually the phone rang and someone said, yes, we'd like to do it again. We'd all talked about the Victorian farm. We thought it's a great idea. And Victoria's reign, obviously being as long as it was, there's all sorts of things happening, all sorts of changes in the landscape. So we felt that was the best time to make a series about. And of course, there's also a lot of kit surviving as well from that period, certainly from that golden age, the 1850s and 1860s. There's an enormous amount of kit surviving. So we looked at a number of sites and eventually came up with Acton Scott. My first impressions were this, and I thought, wow, this isn't quite like the warm, cosy, and romantic farmstead that we had in town in the Green Valley. It was an awful day. It was wet. It was cold. And the first thing I saw was oil drums and all this sort of typical stuff that you tend to find around a good working farm. You know, obviously never throw anything away. But that's, of course, precisely what we had to do. We had to clear out. But actually, Acton Scott turned into a real gem of a place for a number of reasons. I think first and foremost, Thomas Stackhouse Acton, the owner of the estate, has been dedicated to historic farming. Since the 1950s, he started collecting both the literature and the tools, and also the most important thing for us today, I think, is the skills. That was the thing that he was really on preserving, and he had a whole team of people in the early days, what we like to call the old boys, who used to work on the farm. And he kept it going, and by the 1970s the county council got involved, and I think this is the same for many counties actually, with these rural museums. They got involved and it became a sort of official attraction. And just a little note here at the moment, with the sort of impending crisis, if you like, with the museum's culture and cutbacks of up to and beyond 30%, you know, we are confronted with a very, very difficult situation. And I think Acton Scott, despite the success of the series and despite some funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund and the European Regional Development Fund, I think they're looking to put it back into private hands and to, in some ways, offload it really from the council's budget, which obviously creates tensions. I mean, I think if the Actons take it on, you know, they'll be very faithful and true to their father's legacy. But in other places, we know what can happen. Just up the road, Park Hall Estate, that was sold in the late 80s. It was a working historic farm, and sadly now it's got a sort of monkey fun climbing frame set up with lots of painted tractors you can sit on and stroke a llama and all this kind of stuff. And the heritage elements of it have gone. You know, it's very much a gift shop and a car park because it's privately funded. So I think there's always those tensions in trying to be as authentic as possible. So that's just something to think about, and of course something that we always have to think about when we're making the programmes. You know, there's an obvious tension between that desire to tell a kind of ripping yarn, if you like, and there's a great expression that they use in a lot of industries, which is essentially not to let the facts stand in the way of a great story. So we're always confronted with trying to be as authentic as possible, and I'll admit from the outset, we don't actually live in the cottages. We're not allowed to, is one of the key issues there. And I'm probably man enough to admit that after, you know, a few months in one of these cottages, I'd probably get a little bit fed up with things if I didn't lose my marbles completely. So, you know, I am man enough to admit that I am a boy of the 20th century. But our desire, obviously, was to engage with as many of the crafts and skills as possible, and also to try and gain legitimate insights. So to try and keep a degree of authenticity there, but also to keep it contemporary. You know, to making sure the viewer knows that we're not pretending at this. We are actually doing. And this was our first big project on the Victorian farm. We had 10 tonne of the local stone delivered, which we had to work down to build a pigsty. So stonemasonry skill, we had a master stonemason there, a chap called Paul Arrowsmith, who was a fantastic help throughout the year with all sorts of bits and pieces. He sort of showed us the ropes and he stuck around actually to help out. And Peter and I set about building this. We obviously had to get to grips with lime mortar as well, which is a pretty unsavoury product when you're actually working with it, but it's an absolute dream material really. The end product that it makes is a dream material. So that was pretty much full on, what, about 8 weeks work, solid. And that was our kind of introduction to the Victorian farm. Because of course no Victorian farmer would be without a couple of pigs fattening in the yard.